people of Reddit who have encountered ghosts or other supernatural beings. What was your experience like? What happened? Story 1. I was in a motorcycle accident a few months back. I broke my spine and needed surgery to fuse several vertebrae. As they brought me into the surgery, I noticed two men standing in the corner of the OR, looking not at all surgically clean and entirely out of place. Looking back at it, I later recognized them as my two late grandfathers, one of whom died in the hospital. The other died during a surgery. That everything was going to turn out all right, he told my mom, and she wasn't at all surprised because she had heard her father tell her that I was going to be fine, even though this was late and they were the only ones in this dead silent cafeteria. Story 2. I lived in this house with a basement, and every time I walked up the stairs I would get this weird, creepy goosebumps feeling on the back of my neck. It didn't make me uneasy to go down the stairs or to be in the basement. My craft room was down there, and I spent a lot of time there. After a while, I would have items I was using disappear. When I would look away from them, I would search, and one day I got frustrated, and to no one in particular I said, can I please have my scissors back? I had just looked under the pile new mail, and when I turned my head, there were my scissors on top of the pile of mail. I talked to my neighbor, and she told me that the original owner of the house was a jolly old man who loved to prank people, and that he had fell coming up the stairs one day and died. I think the goosebumps were him trying to tell me to be careful, and every time after that, when something would disappear, I would politely ask for it back, and it would appear in a place that I could not have missed it before. Thanks, old man. It was fun. Answer. I also have another story. My dad, the dad of a good friend who took me in as a teen, died of leukemia. When he was alive, he kept all of his things in boxes in his room, but would rummage through them constantly. His daughter and I were living together at the time and kept his things in her room. When she moved out, I kept all his boxes for a bit for her. Every day I would close those boxes, and every day after work they would be opened. He couldn't help but rummage through them. He was an amazing man who couldn't not take care of his ladies, so I think he was not the kind to move on. After he died, I still see his figure out of the corner of my eye, and I know he is watching out for me. Story 3. My grandparents used to have a really beautiful painting of my aunt hanging in their living room. And yes, she is still alive. Anyways, when I was about 5 or 6, I was sleeping in their living room one night when I heard it talking to me. It was her voice, and it talked to me just like she would have. It was weird because I was really calm and not scared, even talking back. But I knew that paintings don't talk. Eventually, she told me to go wake up my grandpa and tell him she wants to talk to him. I went and woke him up, and when he realized I was talking about the painting, he got really pissed. He came back in after a few minutes and told us he shot one of the guys trying to break into his house in the arm, but they all got away. It turns out that a prison for minors about 20 miles away had 3 escapees. They ran through the woods until they came to my grandpa's property and planned on looting what they could and use us as hostages if necessary. That is, until my aunt's painting woke me up and told me to wake him up. Story 4. I was woken up one night by my grandmother standing next to my bed. It was odd because she lived in a nursing home, but for some reason it felt totally normal to see her standing there. I remember looking up at her and feeling very calm and at peace. Nothing was said. We just looked at each other for what felt like a minute or two, and then I put my head back down and went back to sleep. I found out the next morning that she had died that night. My brother said he also saw her that night, standing by his bed in a long blue nightgown. She was wearing the same thing when I saw her, and so happened to be wearing a long blue nightgown when she died. Story 5. I've posted about this before, but I'll tell it again. I'm a lover of horror, supernatural, creepy things. I spent a lot of my teens and childhood ghost hunting with my friends in random graveyards, run-down neighborhoods, abandoned factories, etc. That being said, we never really encountered anything other than psychosomatic ghosts that our overactive imagination created. Despite loving horror, I didn't really believe that any sort of corporeal ghosts were real. When I was 15, I traveled to Europe with my family. We stayed in Ettel, Germany, in a small inn for a few nights. My parents had a double on the second floor. My sisters had the double bedroom next to theirs, and I was lucky enough to have a single room all to myself at the far end of the hall. When we went to check into our rooms, as soon as I entered the hallway our rooms were in, I remember almost feeling as though I walked into a wall of bad energy. I just felt so unnerved and uneasy in that hallway, but I passed it off as overactive imagination. I slept the first night without any issues other than waking up a few times. The next morning at breakfast, one of my sisters mentioned feeling really uncomfortable in the hallway, almost as if the air was crushing. It unnerved me even more that I wasn't the only one who felt weirded out. Plus, she was an adult at the time, so it further cemented in my head that that wing of the hotel was odd. Later that night, I'm sleeping peacefully when at about 2 a.m., I'm woken by something ripping the covers off of me and being jerked about 2 feet towards the end of the bed by my ankle. At first, I thought someone had broken into my room, because when I turned towards what had grabbed me, a huge looming black shape was visible in the darkness, like a man was in my room. I frantically flipped the light on, only to have there be nothing there. The window was locked from the inside. There was no one in the closet or the bathroom, and my room was also still locked from the inside. I stayed up the rest of the night scared shitless, playing Cookie Mama on my DS. Next morning, we're at breakfast, and my sister mentions that she was up half the night because she thought she saw a person silhouetted against the wall of the room. But when she turned on the light, there was no one there. It was just a bizarre and creepy experience, and we checked out that day, so I didn't get to experience anything after that. But it still freaks me out to this day. Answer: this reminds me a little of what I was told by my dad. This happened to a friend of his. My dad's company opened overseas locations in Haiti or Borneo, can't remember which, and offered nice incentives for employees willing to relocate. My dad's friend, we'll call him Ted, who was single at the time, took the offer and moved to one of these locations. Remember, this story was told by a full-grown man to a full-grown man, neither of whom has any history of mental illness or an overactive imagination. So Ted moves. Odd in his eyes, voodoo and witchcraft type elements. He even starts dating the exotic local women. So he's dating local women, and because of his income, which is high for the region, he does quite well and is maybe a bit of a player. He schedules a date with a woman and forgets or changes his mind and ends up standing her up. He thinks nothing of it. The next week, he hears through the grapevine that she is pissed, and he's told that she is not someone you want to piss off. Local reputation has her as some type of voodoo priestess or practitioner of the dark arts. Ted doesn't buy into that. Bullshit. So he's not intimidated. He's got a short business trip that weekend and stays in a hotel on Saturday night. In his hotel room, there's the normal ambient light from the alarm clock and other electronics. There's the noise you inevitably have in a city. Cars, sirens, people, etc. Ted goes to sleep, like usual. A couple of hours later, he wakes up and the room is cold and utterly dark, like his eyes are still shut. He can't hear the sounds of the city anymore. Ted was a grown man, and he told my dad the most terrifying aspect was the palpable feeling and sense of present evil in the room. Ted didn't sleep the rest of the night. I'm not sure how much long after, but he ended up moving back to the US. Side note, I also have an uncle who is a priest. He's not allowed to reveal the contents of secret church files on the supernatural and demonic, but he stated that there is stuff that would make you shoot yourself. Story 6. All through college and a little while after, I worked as a nurse's aide in a nursing home. I spent most of that time in the Alzheimer's unit, hospice, and the general facility for those who were unable to care for themselves. My first aide job, I worked at a particularly unsettling location in Sioux Center, Iowa. It was an old hospital that was converted to a care facility. Think of a school built in the 1950s. A lot of granite, brick, and sturdy ceramic. Just beautiful. I've read that it has since been torn down and replaced with a new facility. So, one day, a lady resident is dying. She's getting near the end and is in and out of consciousness. Just past the foot of her bed is a sink and counter that, along with her regular bathroom items, held a small glass of water. When this resident would come to, she'd point to the end of the bed and mumble comments about how the little girl was going to knock over the glass of water, that we had to tell her to playing around because she was going to make a mess. Eventually, this resident slipped into unconsciousness. The nurse, an older woman herself who had been enrolled for decades and had seen it all, and I are sitting there making small talk. I, on the other hand, a 19-year-old guy who was mildly freaked out, began to ask the nurse if she saw it too, was cut off by her saying, "Let's just focus on our patient, shall we?" I pulled myself together and tried to think about my job, but I was kind of losing it. That cup was inches away from the edge of the counter, and nobody was in the room with us. The resident eventually died, and we did our thing. Fast forward a few hours later. The way the hallways were set up, it looked like a very big T. At the top of the T, where the two walls formed a perpendicular meet, was the nurse's station. That's where I had to camp out most of the evening. Everyone was in bed, and I had to eliminate time between rounds. The nurse was on another floor, doing something, and I was all alone. If you looked at the ceiling at the point where the two walls met, you'd see a circular mirror. It was so that you could see down all of the halls at once from the desk. Eventually, my peripheral picked up movement, and I looked up to the mirror, right there, in the middle of the hall about 15 yards behind. Me was the little girl. She looked about 6, with a little sundress and long brown hair. She was doing this slow, random dance that little girls sometimes do, without seeming to have a care in the world. I lost my chute, stood up, walked around the entrance to the nurse's station, while holding my hand up to the right side of my head so that I couldn't see down that hall, and bolted for the stairs. I found the nurse and told her what I saw. She laughed and admitted that over the years, a lot of residents had seen the little girl, and that I had nothing to worry about. It took me a couple hours to calm down, and in the next couple years I continued to work there. I never saw her again. I did see other things though, and can elaborate if anyone would like. I'll see how far this comment gets buried in the comments. Story 7. I tell this same story every time the question is asked, so here goes. Woke up to get a glass of water at night. Passed my dad on the way to the kitchen. I asked him something about where was he going. He walked right past me, like he didn't see or even hear me, just was in a type of trance, and he walked out the front door. I looked out the front window and he was sitting on our sidewalk under a tree, hands on his knees, staring into the dark. I went to my mom's room to ask her what Dad was doing. She said, "What do you mean? He's right here." She scooted over, as there was my dad, laying in bed asleep. Answer: something similar happened to me when I was about 4 years old. My dad would sometimes have to leave really early in the morning for business trips. One time I woke up around 6:30 in the morning having to pee. When I was on my way back from the bathroom, I saw my dad lumbering down the stairs, and I sleepily called out, "Have a great trip," to him, and went back to bed. When I called him later that day, I asked why he didn't say anything back, and he told me he left the house at 4 a.m. He was already at the airport by 6:30. Story 8. I was hanging out at my friend's house with her boyfriend. We were watching TV, and she had some unlit tea lights on the top of it, an old CRT TV. All of a sudden, 2 of the tea lights fly off the top and slam into opposite walls. She got up and said, "That's been happening a lot lately." Story 9. Posted this before. I was home alone when I was about 21. My parents' house has always been creepy. Even my friends have noticed paranormal things happening in the home, i.e., socks moving, doors randomly closing, and lights turning on and off. So I go to sleep. I am awoken by TV which is suddenly on full volume and has an image frozen on it. It almost looked like the Scream painting by Munch. The sound it was making I can only describe as a high-pitched robotic scream. Strange thing is the remote control and power buttons didn't work for turning it off. I had to unplug it from the wall, so I unplug and get back into bed. After about 15 minutes, my heart rate is back to normal, and I am calm. That's when I heard the footsteps in the hallway. My parents' house has wooden floors. I heard 6 distinct steps coming from the hallway. I could tell the exact location by sound, and it sounded like whatever it was had boots on. I pick up a bedside knife and sit on bed in pitchback, just listening. I sat there for about 30 minutes without hearing another sound. I then get comfortable again. After about another 20 minutes, I hear the steps again, from the same area of the hallway. This time I sit on the edge of my bed for about an hour, complete darkness and quite just listening. Still nothing. I laid in bed until I had to get ready for work at 6 a.m., just staring at the ceiling, listening. Once the sun came up, I went out to explore the house. All doors and windows were closed and locked. I searched every room and closet, etc., etc. Nothing. Still to this day, creepiest thing I have ever experienced. I have more stories, even some that include my wife experiencing paranormal things in that house. Story 10. She was dressed all in black, very gothic, and was clearly a talented actress. Being 6 foot and 5'10", we towered over the 2 other couples and the 2 hen parties that were on the tour with us. Out of respect for them, we stood in the back of the group. When we arrived at the Covenanters prison, worth a Google search, I thought our tour guide was laying it on wonderfully. My boyfriend saw me jerk back and we both spun around. But we were at the back of the group. It was impressively strong and it scared the crap out of me. We continued into a crypt in the Covenanters prison. Again, We stood at the back of the pack, but this time I was a little less happy about it. While our guide talked, I felt another tug on my hair. This one was much weaker than the last, so I could have just caught my hair on my jacket or purse. I was pretty freaked out. Some of the girls from one of the hen parties were pretty impaired. One girl was standing in front of us. I remember thinking she was very brave to wear white pants and a light yellow t-shirt to the muddy cemetery on a rainy day. She started jerking her right knee forward at an odd angle. After a few times, she turns around and yells, "Stop fudge kicking me! Shoot!" My boyfriend and I look at each other and at the other couple, standing beside and slightly in front of us. None of us were anywhere near her. Now, this girl was pretty intoxicated, so while I was already freaked out, I was prepared to disregard her until the last kick. I was watching her leg, and clear as day, she bent her knee forward and gasped, and I saw a muddy footprint appear on the back of her pants. They were bright white, and we all confirmed after the fact it was a footprint. We could distinguish toes. At this point, I grabbed onto my boyfriend for dear life and held on until the guide was done talking. As soon as she was done, the other couple joined us in running out of that crypt. We all chatted with our tour guide and a couple of her co-workers for a while. She told us that our experience is pretty standard there. She wasn't acting when she warned us. Edit. I just wanted to say thank you for all the kind replies. If you're interested, we took the City of the Dead tour. They have a few, and we enjoy them all. Even if you don't care about the paranormal, the tours are an excellent opportunity to learn about the city and its history. If nothing else, it's very entertaining. Yes, this is the cemetery that J.K. Rowling based some characters on. Our guide pointed out a lot of the headstones that inspired characters' names. The did do the cheesy guy jumps out in a mask thing. It was fun. Ended the tour with a laugh. The actual history of the Covenanters' prison is horrific and a good reminder to be nice to one another. Yes, the cemetery is basically cake of dead people and dirt. Answer. My girlfriend and I were there last year. Such a cool spot. We didn't have an experience like yours, but seeing Tom Riddle's grave, who it is theorized is the source of Voldemort's name, was super cool. The story of Greyfriar Bobby was amazing too. Apparently a dog named Bobby was adopted by a man, but the man died a couple years later and was buried in Greyfriars. Bobby the dog guarded the man's grave for 12 years after that, until his passing. Bobby was buried near his master and has a tombstone himself. When we up to it, we saw it was decorated not with flowers, but dozens of sticks. Needless to say, tears were shed. Story 11. Growing up as a Navy brat, I lived in several houses, but only one was haunted. Thing was, it was brand new house. However, the land was old and had a bloody history. This was in Virginia, where you could throw a stone and hit something colonial war, or civil war, or slave trade related almost every time. This brand new ranch-style house was always cold, even in the hot, humid summers. You could turn off the AC and it would still be cold, to the point that my toes would cramp up. Lights were always flickering despite the wiring being new. Doorknobs were always being jiggled. The door that led into the garage was always shaking. Mom, who never bought the concept of the house being haunted, would say, "Oh, that's the wind going through the garage." Never mind that the garage door was almost always closed. We never parked the car in there. It was more or less used as a storage space. The rest of the doors would close themselves a few seconds after being open. Not slamming themselves, mind you, just slowly closing themselves. Thing is, they hadn't always done this. For years they stayed open, then one day they all seemingly decided to start closing by themselves. I always had this uneasy feeling of being watched by something. One night, whatever or whoever it was, touched me. I'm 11. Being 11 and doing things 11-year-olds do, I sneaked out to the living room in the middle of the night to watch some late-night television. Like every kid who does this, I had my face inches from the screen and the volume almost down to 0. An itch began to build right between my shoulders, almost like someone was poking me. I reached over and that's when I felt it. A hand, a man's hand. My fingers touched in between fingers and brushed knuckles. I gasped and turned around. Nothing. I turned off the television, jumped up, and ran back to my room. Under the covers, I buried myself, hoping that whatever had touched me wasn't going to follow me and start poking me again. It didn't. But after that, I didn't sneak out to watch late-night television for months and months. When I finally did, I would watch the screen for a minute, and then turn around to make sure no one was behind me. No way was I going to be poked by a ghost again.